The first thing you might have questions or difficulties with is understanding what is considered a road, and for the purposes of our work, which is understanding the impacts of roads on the environment, we consider a road to be any man-made path or track that could be used to travel by vehicle and that is land-based. So we include dirt tracks, logging roads, even tire tracks that are well travelled enough to be visible in satellite imagery. However, there are some situations where things may look like roads, but they aren't roads, so I'll give you some quick examples of what we would want mapped as roads and what we don't want mapped as roads. The first example here is a terraced landscape in Sarawak, Malaysia. In this example, we would want the roads between the terraced areas mapped, but not the terracing itself. And we can see here that we have lots of roads along here, but we also have lots of terraced areas in between. If you're having trouble telling them apart, you can also change your viewing angle, and that will allow you to be able to differentiate where the roads are versus where all the little terraced areas are in between it. The second example is again in Sarawak, but this time we are looking at small logging tracks. This is probably what the terraced landscape looked like a few years before the complete clearing, and we can see that there are main tracks here that are used by the loggers to travel through the landscape, accompanied by lots of smaller tracks that are used to open the area up for clearing. In this instance, we would want all the main tracks mapped, and any of the smaller tracks that are more than a few meters long, such as this one here, we would also want mapped. However, for the tracks that are only a couple of meters, like this bit or this bit here, we don't really need to worry too much about them because they'll be captured by the spatial scale of our data anyway. For the third example, we're jumping across to Kalimantan, Indonesia, and in this area we can see a mixture of lots of canals and roads. And we want to be mapping the roads here, but not the canals. So in most cases you can see a road across here, such as this light area next to the darker canals. However, where there isn't a road accompanying the canal, such as this one in the middle here, we don't want to map that. We're only interested in mapping things that can be travelled on land. So in summary, what we want to map is any sort of man-made feature that can be used to travel across using some sort of motorized vehicle, and it's more than 50 meters long or so. One of the most common difficulties when mapping new roads in Google Earth is dealing with lower quality imagery and determining if what we are looking at is a road, such as what we can see in this imagery here. And there are a few tricks you can use to determine if what you're looking at is a road or if it's a river or some other linear mark in the landscape. The first trick is to try and look at your historic imagery by going to the clock up the top here and try and see if there is any better imagery at past points in time that might let you figure out if what you're looking at is a road or a river. Unfortunately for this area, it's not too useful, so we can try the next trick, which is to change the viewing angle by holding down Shift and using the scroll wheel. And from this we can see that these lines here are following the exact location we would expect them to be if they were a river rather than a road. So because they're in the bottom of a ravine here, which you can see if we turn around like this, they're right in the bottom, which is where you would expect a river to be, whereas a road would be more up the side to avoid floodwaters. And a third trick is to follow the line along its length until you can find better quality imagery at some point, which will let you know what it is. And we can use that on this part here, which it's difficult to tell here, but if we follow it along its length, we can see that this is actually a river. And therefore, if this is a river here, then it's most likely a river along the whole length of it. Another common issue with the road mapping relates to the existing road data and its accuracy. The existing road maps will have varying levels of accuracy depending on where you are mapping, such as the imagery you can see on the screen now, where the road data is slightly off the actual roads. So you can see the road in the image is here, but the existing road data is a few meters off here. Don't worry about this. You definitely don't need to remap these roads, even if they're a bit inaccurate. All you have to do is figure out which road in the map, in the imagery, corresponds to the road in the data, so you're mapping the correct ones. So for example, if we zoom in here, we can see that even though this yellow line is a bit out of place, it definitely corresponds to this image here, so we can then map in all of these other roads. Even if the road data doesn't look much like what you're seeing in the map, don't worry about it as long as it is in the right place. So as we can see here, it shows a straight line all the way across here, even though at some points it might be a bit curved. This is still in more or less the right position, so don't worry about remapping these areas here. However, you do still want to make sure that you are mapping the roads in between the existing roads. So this road we can see up here is not in the existing road map, as this straight line corresponds to the road up here. So we do want to make sure that we are mapping the roads that aren't in the existing road map that are in and around the existing road still. If you're having real doubts about it, it's better to leave the road unmapped, and when we check your imagery and maps, we can fix things if they need to be. And certainly don't delete any roads from the existing data, even if you can't see it in the imagery, as we can't be sure if there's a road there or not based on the imagery dates, but there was certainly at least a road there at some point. Being able to tell dirty rivers from dirt roads can also be difficult on occasion. If your imagery is of good quality, you can usually zoom right in to see if what you are drawing is a river or a road. So looking at the imagery here, we can see lots of markings all over the map, and it can be a bit difficult to see if what we're looking at is a river or a road. But if we zoom right in, we can see, for example, this we can tell is a river, whereas we've got road here, paved road coming into dirt roads here. A good way to tell is to look at the shape. Rivers often have very tight turns like this in it that you wouldn't usually see in roads. However, that's not always a perfect guide, but it's a good way to give you an indication. Additionally, you can look for things like rocks and riverbanks. So if we look over here, you can see banks along the river. You can see banks on the river here. Another riverbank there. And roads are also typically brighter in the imagery, so we can see this road here really stands out. It looks almost white in most patches, whereas the rivers are consistently quite brown and dark coloured. And as always though, if you spend a few minutes trying to figure out if what you're looking at is a road or a river, it's better just to leave it, and when we check your imagery, we can let you know how you went and we will fix things up also. But with a bit of practice, you'll develop a good ability to differentiate between roads and rivers and other linear marks.